How's everybody back here?
30 seconds. 30-second countdown.
30 seconds.
ADR, always looking for it.
Oh, that's true. That Vincent Dixon dancing.
That's right. I know.
Isn't that so funny?
It was cute.
It was. All right, we're going to call this press conference to begin. Senator Lundy Lamar, chairwoman of the Tennessee Senate Democratic Caucus. So we're here today to gather to reflect on many of the positive aspects of what we were able to accomplish this week here in the legislature. I will begin by saying it is a big transition back as we're recovering from the winter storm. Many of us are scrambling and working double time in order to catch up, making sure we're taking care of our constituent needs. What we do hope is that the state continues to support our local governments as they are trying to recover from a tough winter storm here in Nashville, Memphis, and all across the state. As well as each of us are going to talk about some pieces of legislation we are working on this week and plan to push forth in the next coming weeks. So I'll begin by talking about a few pieces of legislation that I'm working on. Many of you all know that I champion maternal health. And it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And so this past week, we hosted Tennessee Maternal Health Day on the Hill this past Tuesday. At this particular Day on the Hill, we were able to push forth a maternal health agenda that is about connecting women with services and resources and ensuring our departments are giving women the adequate support that they need. So this week, we're happy to know that Senate Bill 44 made it out of House Insurance Full Committee and is headed to the Health Committee. What this bill does, it creates a verification for doulas so that they can be eligible for TennCare when TennCare decides to bring doula services as part of reoccurring services under their healthcare program. We are also pushing forth legislation to make sure that emergency rooms cannot turn away pregnant women in active labor. As we seen the viral video a couple of weeks ago of a woman who was turned away in an emergency room and ended up giving birth in the car, we want to ensure that doesn't happen here in Tennessee, especially that rural areas in our state are closing maternity wards with the largest closures than most states in the country. So we know there's a gap we need to fill to make sure pregnant women across the state, whether rural or urban, make sure they can have the support that they need in the hospital. We also are pushing legislation for the Department of Health to offer scholarships for women whose pregnancies ended stillbirth. When you go into the hospital, you're thinking you're going to give birth or you're going to come out with a miracle, but sometimes it doesn't always end that way. And then you're expected to pay for a funeral or burial services for a child whose birth ended in stillbirth. And so we want to ensure that women, regardless of your socioeconomic background, are able to bury their children with dignity and support in such an unexpected time. In addition, we are also doing a study to see how we can get certified nurse midwives to be able to practice independently. With such gaps in the rural area around maternity care, being able to have nurse midwives fill in those gaps in lieu of OBGYNs is something that's being positive to help fill the need of the lack of services in our rural areas and some of our urban enclaves. And most importantly, we are pushing legislation as a resolution to support doula coverage, urging TennCare to add doula coverages to their list of services. And we also want the Tennessee Department of Corrections to explore other alternatives for pregnant women who are incarcerated. In addition, outside of that, the next piece of legislation I'm pushing next week is Senate Bill 1991. This piece of legislation is going to remove junk fees in our state. When you go online to buy a hotel room or an Airbnb or any other type of hospitality services, you see something called a service fee. What does a service fee actually pay for? They advertise a price. You want to check out. Now it's much more money than is being advertised. That is not right. So what we're going to do is to champion the fact that Tennesseans deserve to know what they are actually paying before they check out. No more hidden fees, no more surplus charges, just honest pricing so families can budget and businesses can be completely fair. If you can't be upfront about your prices, you shouldn't be doing business in Tennessee. We've seen states and cities around the country implement this piece of legislation to remove junk fees. You just saw that New York City just put in legislation to remove junk fees. It is something that's trending across the country because consumers are already strapped when it comes to finances. So we need to encourage honest pricing on the front end. So I hope to have support around this piece of legislation. And if without any questions at the end, I would like to pass it over to our leader, Raumesh Akbari.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Lamar. In keeping with the theme of really trying to protect our women in this state and young girls, we passed legislation on the Senate floor on Monday that will create a pilot program to put vending machines in each grand division across the state with feminine hygiene products. These products will be at no charge to the young ladies who need to access them. Really want to see how this program works and if it can be something that's expanded across the state. Already, we've had a significant amount of interest from people who've seen news stories or seen it on social media where they want to bring it to their schools. They really feel like it's a need that needs to be met. I even talked to a young lady today, and she reminded me, hey, you have young ladies on college campuses who are experiencing the same type of period poverty. Another bill that we've been working on for a couple years now is to allow women across the state to be able to get a 12-month supply of birth control with private insurance. This is something that we passed a couple of years ago as a General Assembly for those on TennCare. Now we want to make sure that women who have private insurance are able to have the same benefits. It's really simple. Your doctor prescribes a 12-month supply. You can go to your pharmacy. You can get that 12-month supply. And the reason why it's important is because we want to make sure that women who live in, you know, prescription deserts or who have to travel a great deal to get their prescriptions don't miss a dose. We want to make sure that women who take these products, not just for birth control, but also for a host of other issues related specifically to being a woman, are able to not miss a dose. And we've seen other states do this, a significant amount of states, almost half of them in the union. So, we often get up here and talk about things that we wish we could do. And fortunately, sometimes there are things that we are able to do. Now, I'm going to kick it over to my House colleagues. I think they have some bills they want to talk about around transparency that really are important to this state. And with that, I will kick it over to Chairman John Wright Clemens.
Thank you, Leader. So the House is a little bit different story. So a couple things this week. First of all, we continue to see complete nonsense agenda. This Stephen Miller agenda being pushed by the Republicans up here in the state house, when Tennesseans are begging and deserve leadership on the real issues impacting their families. You know, our roads are in the worst shape they've been in my lifetime. Hospitals are still threatening to be closed down. Healthcare costs are going up. Prescription prices are increasing, and costs at the grocery store are still skyrocketing. And people of Tennessee elect us to come up here and lead with courage and do the right thing by them and address the problems facing their family on a daily basis. That's what we're here to do. Everyone up here is here to roll up our sleeves, go to work for Tennessee's families. Unfortunately, that's not what you see in the headlines today. That's not what you see being pushed through committee today. You continue to see this DC agenda being delivered from Stephen Miller to the hands of Republican leadership and them obeying and doing the bidding of Stephen Miller, which is problematic on a whole host of levels when you know who Stephen Miller actually is and what his I don't know if you can call them values are, but anyway. Um, so we're going to continue pushing our agenda. We're continuing to fight for transportation infrastructure funding to modernize the way we fund transportation infrastructure. We're going to continue to fight to strengthen and fully fund our public schools. We're going to continue to fight to lower costs for working families across the board, healthcare, groceries, and other agenda items that we're pushing. That's our agenda, a Tennessee agenda, a Tennessee families first agenda. That's the Democratic agenda. And this week you saw with regards to public education, my colleague who's with us today, Representative Sam McKenzie, pushed a transparency bill for the voucher program. I think the Tennessean and others have published information about Tennesseans want accountability. They want transparency in the program. It's something we asked for and demanded when we debated the legislation. Of course, they refuse to do it, and we all know why they don't want the data to be produced. Even the fiscal note produced by the Fiscal Review Committee last year for their voucher scam said that over 80% of the children were expected to already be in private school taking advantage of this program. And based on the numbers we've collected and some of the data that's being collected by the Tennessean and others, we know a couple of things. We know that a high percentage, probably close to what Fiscal Review Committee estimated, of those children were already in private school. So this voucher, the largest new welfare program created in the state in the last 50 years, is only benefiting some of the wealthiest families in Tennessee. And we're spending already $500 million on it in year one. This year, of course, the governor wants to double that and add 155.3 million plus additional administrative costs on top of that, when we could be investing those dollars in working families. This is a priority problem. And so, they don't want the transparency. They defeated and killed Representative McKenzie's bill outright. And what I was most taken aback by, not only the reluctance of the Republican Party to allow for transparency in the way that people's tax dollars are being spent, um, but the governor said, in defense of his opposition to transparency laws, is that there was no data of any value at this time after only 1 year of the program. Now, if we're going to pass education policy, the ultimate aim usually is and should be improving educational outcomes, providing opportunities for those who don't otherwise have those opportunities. But now here we go, we want to double the program. Well, we have no data to support that we're benefiting anyone's educational experience, that we're improving educational outcomes for any child. So the question we should be asking is why? I mean, I think I know why. I can speculate as to why, but and I've certainly been vocal about that, and my colleagues have as well. But that's really telling. I mean, pay attention to what the governor is saying. Listen to what he is admitting. No data of any real value exists. Yet he's already ready to throw another $500 million at this. That is incredibly problematic when you have people across the state of Tennessee fighting to pay their bills, fighting to get access to health care, driving their cars down roads with potholes all over the place, sitting in traffic for hours when they're just trying to get home from work to go to church or their kid's ball game. This is a story of misplaced priorities and a lack of values, I would argue. So we're going to continue to work on that. We're going to continue to push our Tennessee Families First agenda to really address the issues facing Tennessee families. And I guess the rest of it is they continue to push this culture war, this anti-immigrant agenda, excuse me, bullshit agenda. And it is, Stephen Miller, straight from Stephen Miller. So with that, if you have any questions about the transparency bill or anything else, we're happy to answer them.
Representative McKenzie, for you, just asked the speaker about this, and so it's kind of a 2-point question, I guess. As I understood the speaker, and I think maybe you heard from some of your Republican colleagues during the subcommittee this week, they claim the Department of Education doesn't have the information you're seeking. In other words, where the students were before they went in to the education training scholarship or voucher program, things like that. Does that data actually exist in the Department of Education? And secondly, he said transparency is coming, maybe in a caption bill, but it would do more than just track where students were coming from. It would require a look at how they performed on standardized tests prior to going into the program and others. But he fears LEAs, teacher unions and stuff would balk at releasing that information. On both of those, where would you stand after seeing your very simple, as you described it to me this week, transparency bill just killed?
I can't help but say again, as I politely said in committee meeting to Representative Slater, I'm going to push back on that. That's not the truth. You can't tell me that the Department of Education doesn't know how many students and what students went to each elementary, middle, and high school school in 25 and 24, 25, and then take another count this year. They have the data. They're just refusing to release the data. They have it, and they've said that we're not going to do it unless compelled by law. That's what the Department of Education said. That's not saying that we don't know. That's saying that they are not going to do it unless compelled to do it. So that's just flat out not the truth. The data exists. They know how many students are there. In fact, part of last year's bill was a hold harmless clause. And that was basically saying what students left your school and took this voucher and moved on. So they said in the bill that we can provide you monies for the students that left. Now we're asking which students left. And then it's, oh, we can't figure that out. That's just flat out not true. Department of Education is lazy and they're doing the bidding of the governor and the speaker. And that's just, it's really unfortunate. But more importantly, if just go back a couple of years and see how they pitched this bill. This bill was about these children in these poor, failing schools. We got to get them a chance. Do they get a chance as well? Now it's let's give it away. Let's give the money away regardless of income. They're bragging on 56,000 applications. You know what happened? People said, wow, these people got $8,000. My buddy, whose daughter is going to school with my son, they got a $8,000 bonus. Let me apply for that as well. They're going to double the pot. These are programs for the rich and almost rich. As Chairman said, this is welfare. The governor is pushing a welfare agenda for the rich and almost rich at the pearl of our public schools. You know, the second question, could you repeat that?
Was the speaker said accountability and transparency is coming possibly in a caption bill, but it's going to include more than just where these students were and where they're going. They want to access prior achievement scores to see whether or not these students are doing better. But they anticipate pushback from local LEAs, teachers unions, and others that don't want that.
Do you hear what he just said? That is, quite frankly, ridiculous on a lot of fronts. The first one, he's saying that we got a caption bill to get this information. That's what he said. We're going to have a caption bill that gets this, what Representative McKenzie asked for, plus more. So that means the data's there. But also, we have data. The scholarships that happen in Shelby County, Davidson County, Hamilton County, there's clear data because we forced them to take the TCAP. They're not doing as well. That's rock solid data that says our public school students are doing better than their voucher kids. And I say they because it's become that. So that's the data. But built into the bill that we passed last year, there's no accountability. There's no requirement for some type of standardized testing to see whether Johnny and Jane are doing better or worse. So I would love for that to happen. But he has this nebulous thing. He wants it all to go away. He wants us to quit talking about it, and we're not because Tennesseans deserve better. Thank you.
Republicans said that Biden era inflation is impacting farmers and the tourism industry more than Trump's tariffs. What are you all hearing from your constituents as far as that?
I'll take that a little bit. I think Chairman Clemens probably has something to say as well. I'll just say that's just simply not true. It's a narrative that continues to be pushed, Biden and inflation. And the bottom line is tariffs have dramatically increased the cost of everything. They made it much more difficult for farmers to generate any sort of real revenue for their products. And we see it every day when we go to the grocery stores, when we get gas, when we pay for our electric bills, all of those things. So let's just leave Biden alone. He is no longer the president. And I think the person or the administration that needs to be held accountable is the administration that's in charge right now. The administration that we can literally look at the data that shows that folks' dollars just aren't going as far as they were going this time last year.
Thank you for give me a chance to calm down.
I
I would encourage you to just read the data that I held up last week from the Boyd Center from the University of Tennessee. Speaks directly to that point and what the variables are that are leading to the losses for the farmers across the state of Tennessee that are really struggling right now. And we pointed out last week, I believe it's $102 million in losses after the bailout for row crop farmers. I have a row crop farmer, a large one in my family. And the impacts are real, and the beef prices are continuing to skyrocket. Now, are there other factors, environmental issues and things like that, inability to replace parts on tractors and various costs like that have been around for quite a while. Yeah, those are factors. So we can't ignore those. But the impact and the data is real, and the impact of the tariffs and these poor policies are having, not to mention the labor market for our farmers. Um, and the impact that's having. And I also would like to bring up, and this is this the spirit of your question, but I think everybody should pay attention to. We all were visited in the last week or two by the Suicide Prevention Network, and I think I want to bring attention to the fact that our farmers across the state of Tennessee are seeing increasing suicide rates, and that is something that we need to bring attention to, and really make sure we don't ignore that. The state of Tennessee has a great website and great resources for farmers and their families who are experiencing that kind of trauma. And if anybody's in need, there are resources available to our farmers. But that's a direct result of the economic trends and the new challenges that you know, that are being experienced by family farms across the state of Tennessee. We can't lose more farms. We've taken steps. We've invested a lot of taxpayer money into saving farms, and now for us to turn our back on them would be a mistake, and to ignore their real variables causing their pain would be a mistake as well.
I would also like to add that I think that people in America are starting to see that Trump is directly responsible for the economic crisis that we're experiencing here in this country. I want to point light to the fact that in Texas, a Democratic state Senate candidate just won a special election in a district that was a 17-point Trump district. So it's not no longer about what we think is happening. People on the ground, voters are directly feeling the incapacity of our president to be able to alleviate the economic burdens that we are experiencing. And they're going to find out even more when in this upcoming election this year. The people are not with Trump. We are being scammed about the fact that the economics of this country is going to improve under his administration. Economics have gotten worse. People have gotten poorer. People are sicker. We have cut healthcare costs. All around the board, America is doing far worse under Trump than we did under Biden. And you're going to see that when Congress flips, and a lot of these state House and state Senate districts are starting to flip around the country, just like we saw in Texas.
I want to ask about what you started talking about, which is Monty Fritz, who's running for governor, last week confirmed to us that he thinks capital punishment should be on the table for women who get abortions. And so I wanted to see if you had a response to that, and also if there's been a push to undo the IVF bill that Republicans passed last year. I know there were a bunch of Republicans that said they were against it. I want to know if there's been any movement on that.
Well, I say, considering the fact that Tennessee has the highest maternal mortality rate in the country, there's been enough capital deaths when it comes to making sure pregnant women can actually survive and live in this state. I think what he needs to focus on is making sure women can actually live through the childbirthing process instead of kill more women for their own personal health care choices. So I think that majority of Tennessee voters really believe that abortion should be legal. That is the idea of providing healthcare services. And until this state does what it needs to do to ensure that every woman makes it through the pregnancy process, I think he needs to hold that idea and go on somewhere else with it.
I wanted to ask, this week TVA voted to keep their coal power plants open longer than initially anticipated. And they said a big reason is because of the number of AI and data centers that are coming to our area because we have cheap electricity. Is it still a wise investment for Tennessee to try to lure some of these AI centers to the area with, requiring so much electricity to run?
Well, I would say one piece of legislation I have. Well, before I get there, I don't want to make a statement saying for or against. But I do have a piece of legislation to bring some more transparency about the impact of data centers. I have a bill that is going to require data centers to report their usage, how much money it's costing, because what I don't want is the increase in utilities and usage to be spread out onto consumers, to the residents, to the people in the community. They should not be bearing the cost of the increase in data centers. We do know there's about 60 plus data centers in Tennessee right now, but there's very little regulation on how they need to be operating. We need to tighten up regulations. We need more transparency about their usage and how they're impacting the community. And then we can also make a very full intellectual decision around whether we should continue to be welcoming data centers in our communities. No lie. I mean, no doubt that AI is here to stay, right? We're seeing AI is not going anywhere. but it's really a conversation about how do we integrate the use of AI so that we can still utilize the services, but also its usage is in not impact the utility costs of people and residents in our community. They should bear the full cost of their usage and making sure that it doesn't impact the environment unnecessarily.
I would just add, there's certainly an economic value to the state of Tennessee for these data centers. And that's something that has to be weighed heavily against the impact on consumers and the environment and everyone's electric utility bills. So that is a real balancing act that the state and all of us are going to have a say in the coming years. And several of us have legislation. I have one requiring 50% of public benefit be used from the data. She has a transparent, Senator Lamar has a transparency one. Even some Republicans have some legislation on this point. And, and the question now is this inevitable? And if it is inevitable, how do we rein it in and balance the interest of ratepayers and the environment and everything else at the same time? And that is a serious policy discussion to be had, and that I hope is in the public forum very soon. I think I think they're rushing to this. They see the demand, they see the potential impact on their ratepayers, and they're taking the easiest option for themselves by just extending the life of those coal-fired power plants. But those are in fact not the cheapest plants to run. You want to lower costs for ratepayers and be able to address the energy demands of these types of things like data centers and others. You've got to look at solar. You've got to look at renewable energy options where the cost of those are actually decreasing below any of these traditional historic ways of producing power. So I wasn't there. I didn't see the discussion. I haven't read the transcript of that meeting yet, but I assume they're just trying to take quick action to address a real problem that's right now. But I hope in the long run, TVA will have a thoughtful discussion, and any new members that are appointed to that board have a thoughtful discussion about what are the cheapest forms of energy, and can we keep costs low to taxpayers and ratepayers rather, by investing in those cheaper alternatives. And I think solar and a lot of these other alternatives deserve their day in the public forum. And so I hope the TVA does that. And I hope that we are able to keep it from being privatized at the same time.
Do you think Senator Haggerty would privatize it or help privatize it if he took over?
I certainly have fears of what Senator Haggerty and what these other appointees to the board would do. But until we see something concrete, I don't want to speculate as to somebody else's agenda, but I certainly have fears about the privatization of TVA and the impact that will have on ratepayers in our entire Tennessee Valley. That is a worthy concern, I think, for everybody to have. And I know from my experience going across the state of Tennessee, holding town halls in rural and urban communities just in the past year, you want to hear some boos, mention TVA privatization. People do not like that idea, and so I hope they're very aware of that. And I will add, while we're talking about energy, if I might, we had questions last week about NES, and NES is still a looming topic. And the Davidson County delegation held a briefing with NES this week, as I said that we were going to last week. So we held that meeting yesterday and had a really thoughtful discussion, conversation. Aired our concerns, and we have made ourselves available to assist them with whatever changes need to be made, in a positive direction to prevent any mistakes that were made, and also encourage them to be transparent about that process, about recognizing what went wrong, what could have been done better, and how we're going to change that moving forward. So we're right now moving in a productive manner in that relationship. As you know, that's a local issue, but we want to make sure we're representing our constituents and have that detailed discussion with them yesterday.
Just to say a quick thing on the TVA. So I'll quickly say, yes, I think it's a good idea to extend the life of those plants while TVA makes a careful decision. As I agree with everything that's been said here today. But at the end of the day, AI, things like that, it's a tool. It's a scalpel. It's a newer, a more modern scalpel. It's how you use that tool is going to be the key. I also agree with a different structure in what they pay, because there has to be some public benefit. So I'm for a different kind of structure. But one thing people aren't looking at as well is not just the power, it's the water as well for cooling. Let's make sure that we got our arms around that. So it's not coal or nuclear, coal or solar or a wind. I think it's an all type of a conversation that we're going to end up having to have here. But TVA needs to be public power. TVA was created. It was a beautiful thing to create TVA, but now we're here, and TVA is a lot more than electric production. It's really a valuable resource for our entire 6-7 state region.
William Lambert is sponsoring a bill that would criminally penalize illegal immigrants that were ordered to deport and initially refused to leave, or if they try to re-enter the state. I just want to hear your guys' thoughts about that.
Well, I'll say something really quickly, then I'll turn it over to my House colleagues because it is the House Majority Leader. This legislation is troubling to me because this is something that should be handled on a federal level. Right now, being undocumented is not a criminal offense, it is a civil offense. And I think to make this a state level criminal offense is really unnecessary. It's overly punitive, it's not helpful. And I would prefer that we focused our resources and discussion on something that's more meaningful. Quite frankly, I do not want this hodgepodge of immigration laws across the region. Tennessee borders 8 other states, and I really think it's unfair to folks who happen to be undocumented but are vibrant pieces of our community, our economy, our culture, our schools, our churches, our entertainment, and everything else.
I would just echo that. Again, like I said last week, they continue to push these policies that are targeting individuals. When it's the system that's broken, and that's what should be the focus, is the system and the process, and that begins and ends in Washington D.C. So our elected leaders in Washington D.C. are failing Tennessee families, and the further evidence of the fact that this is a Washington D.C. issue is the language of that piece of legislation. It acknowledges that the federal government has control over this issue. It is a civil issue, not a criminal issue, and the federal government has to fix the problem. And that legislation actually references the fact that this is a federal issue. And so then if your legislation acknowledges as a federal issue, then why are you pushing it? I have a feeling it's more about posturing politically and otherwise than it is about actually solving a problem. And, those like Senator Marsha Blackburn, Bill Haggerty, who's MIA all the time, they have failed Tennessee families. They failed the working families of Tennessee by not addressing a broken system. And the reason people are undocumented is because the system is broken. And that's where we need to fix it in Washington, D.C. Down here in Tennessee, we got to be focused on real issues: public schools, roads, lowering cost of living, protecting our local economies, protecting our farmers, addressing real problems impacting families on a daily basis. That's what we're here to do.
Chairman Clements, following your meeting last night about NES, do you get the sense that the saber rattling about NES takeover last week might actually come to pass?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the supermajority's legislation. That's their efforts. I haven't spoken with them about it, and I hope that, and I expect them to have conversations with NES. If they're going to target an entity, I would hope that they're going to have meetings with that entity and discuss and try to get to the root of any problems that exist or any friction that exists. And so, that's what adults do. And I would hope that is done before any legislation is pushed forward. That could be adverse to everyone's interests, not only ratepayers, but the state of Tennessee and metro government. They openly acknowledge mistakes were made, that things they could do better, and that's part of it. We had a historic ice storm, and so a lot of us voiced our displeasure with how some things went down because we heard about it and we experienced it ourselves. And so we're here to work with people to fix problems, and that's what I hope everybody does, whether it's super majority, super minority, local, or state level.
So I'll just say on that one, to me, it sickens me. They always bring out their usual bag of tricks. So it's a DEI problem. Come on, really? You're going to blame an ice storm and the aftermath of that on the fact that you're somehow training more on DEI than you do disaster recovery? That's not true. If you gave every NES employee a 30-minute session compared to you give the people that matter who's on the streets doing disaster recovery, it's a numbers game. He played a numbers game and said that there's more cumulative hours for DEI than that. It's not true, and it doesn't add to the conversation. How do we fix this? How do we help NES fix it? This is a local issue, but again, all of this saber rattling, this this constant focus on Nashville, Davidson County, the area which is really supporting our state at a greater level than 20, 30 times what the average county is doing. But we continually pounce on them. Mistakes were made, fix the mistakes, don't ever do it again, and spread that information so that other areas like Knoxville, Memphis, Clarksville, Chattanooga don't have those same things. That's what this conversation at the state level should be about.
All right, thank y'all.
Thank you, everybody.